If you look at today's liturgy, and if you compare the two Gospels, the Gospel we read at the beginning of Mass and the Passion of our Lord, which we just read, you'll see how it took very little, less than a week, to change the hosannas of the people to violent shouts of "Crucify him." When the emotions of Palm Sunday died down, and that elation of our Lord entering Jerusalem triumphantly, when all those emotions died down, and the hour of the Passion arrived, the scandal of our Lord's cross was too much for some, for many, for most of his followers. Everyone, almost everyone, with very few exceptions, either shouted violently, "Death to him, death to Christ," whom they were acclaiming king days before, "Death to Christ the King, crucify him," or they fled, or they denied our Lord. Today's liturgy reminds us that our Lord, who is our King, on this earth reigns, but he reigns principally from the cross. That is his throne on this earth. And those who want to reign with him on this earth, but also in the next life, those of us who want to reign with our Lord, have only one option, and it's the same option that it was yesterday. Today and always, we must take up our cross, let ourselves be crucified with him, and stay close to our Blessed Mother, to Our Lady, who was one of the few who stayed faithful so as not to wimp out. And one example today for our reflection of this fidelity to our Lord, to Christ the King crucified. Blessed Jose Sanchez del Rio, a recent saint, blessed of the Church, beatified by Pope Benedict XVI, 14 years old, and he teaches us the fidelity that is asked of us today in our difficult day and age, the fidelity we need to show to Christ the King crucified. He died when he was 14. He was born on March 28, 1913 in Mexico, third of 4 children of pious Catholic parents. He was a good boy, naturally pious, loved the Blessed Sacrament, loved Our Lady, said his rosary every day, loved Our Lady of Guadalupe, patroness of his native country of Mexico. When he was only 10 months old, this country of Mexico, which was going through a civil war of chaos and tumult and bloodshed, this country was consecrated to Christ the King by the bishops. And it is then that shout became popular, "Viva Cristo Rey, Santa Maria de Guadalupe," long live Christ the King and Holy Mary of Guadalupe. It became a battle cry for Christians in that country torn by war. When that bloody civil war ended in 1921, there was a period of relative peace for only 3 years, and then another persecution broke out. Jose was only 12 when the Cristeros War broke out. What was this? What happened in this country? In 1917, a new socialist constitution was promulgated. This was in a country that was 98% Catholic. No one was expecting it. It was a country consecrated to Christ the King, and then a persecution hit. It called for a near total shutdown of the Catholic Church in the country, a complete ousting of Christ the King from society. Things quickly went from bad in 1917 to far worse in 1924, when the new president, Plutarco Elias Calles, became president. And by the way, this godless man, this criminal, made it onto the cover of Time magazine on December 8, 1924. A hero back then, this criminal. In time, he became known as Mexico's Nero. According to him, because of their loyalty to the Pope, Catholics couldn't be good citizens in Mexico. You couldn't be a good citizen while claiming fidelity to Christ the King. Either shout death to Christ the King, or you will be put to death. On the 14th of June, 1926, the Calles Law came into effect. Its main points: all foreign priests were expelled from Mexico. Teaching religion anywhere was forbidden. All church property became property of the government. It was illegal to wear any special religious clothing, cassocks, habits, whatever it might be, Any of that in public was illegal. The bishops were to be done away with. There could be no religious services outside of a church. All religious vows became illegal. Priests had to submit their homilies for approval to government authorities. Freedom of the press for Catholics was abolished. Whenever Catholics, who were in the millions at that time in the country, whenever they tried by peaceful means to oppose the government, boycotts, peaceful protests, forming associations, all their actions were declared simply illegal by the government. In the meantime, this enlightened, tolerant government was desecrating churches, executing in gruesome ways men, women, and children across the country. Proof of this still exists today. There's photos which still exist as evidence of how this government acted along railroad tracks for miles, perhaps. Catholics were being hung from telegraph poles to show those who were traveling on the train that they had to choose between Christ the King and their new government, enlightened and tolerant. Catholics were being hung outside of their hometowns on trees and left for everyone to see, to teach them the choice they had to make and the consequences they would have to suffer for their choice. The situation continued and kept getting worse. Blood was being shed, innocent blood was being shed. There were many martyrs. Starting in January of 1927, Catholics began to organize in defense, not only of the faith, not only of the Church, Christ the King, but in defense of their very lives against these unjust aggressors. Self-defense is always legitimate. It's always an option. When the faith, when the church, when third persons, when your families are involved, it becomes a duty. In January of 1927, Catholics organized in defense of themselves, of their homeland, of their faith, of their families. A war ensued. Countless cristeros, as they became called, the followers of Christ the King, the cristeros, countless of them gave their lives for Christ the King and Our Lady of Guadalupe. Amongst them was Blessed Jose, who at his young age of 12 enlisted in the army and was accepted. Engaged in one battle, this was in February of 1928, precise in February 6th, engaged in one of these battles for Christ, he was rushing to supply one of the soldiers ammunition when he caught sight of the general whose horse had been shot dead. The general was on foot, extremely vulnerable. Blessed Jose decided to make a sacrifice which would probably cost him his life. He gave him his own horse so that the general could make his getaway and continue leading the battle while he himself tried to flee. Moments later, he was caught by the Federalists and locked up in a church sacristy that had been turned into a prison. Christ, on this earth, reigns principally from the cross, and if we want to reign with him, we have to let ourselves be crucified with him. Blessed Jose knew that well. On the day that he was captured, he wrote the following letter to his mother. He was 14 years old, was about to turn 15. This young man wrote a letter to his mother. "My dear mother, I was taken prisoner in combat today. I believe that I am going to die very shortly. But it does not matter, Mama. Resign yourself to the will of God. I die happy because I die in the ranks of our Lord. Do not be distressed about my death. The thought of you worrying is my only concern. Tell my brothers to follow the example of their younger brother and to do the will of God. Have courage and send me your blessing and my father's. Give my greetings to all for the last time and receive the heart of your son who loves you and wanted to see you before dying. Jose Sanchez del Rio." 2 days later, on February 8th, usually the cristeros were executed summarily right away. There were so many of them, there was no need to wait. Hung, shot, tortured, whatever it was. These two young boys, the government hoped to frighten them into denial of Christ. They failed miserably. On February 8th, Jose was made to watch the hanging of another boy soldier of the cristeros, Lazarus. Instead of frightening Blessed Jose, witnessing the martyrdom of his companion only strengthened his courage. Another 2 days elapsed, February 10th. Around 6 p.m., they took Jose from the parish church, turned into a prison, to the makeshift barracks across the street and announced his own death sentence. He was still unshaken in his faith. At 11 p.m., the hour of his martyrdom arrived. Believing that torture would change the mind of the boy, the government soldiers flayed the skin from the soles of his feet. They cut off the soles of his feet, thinking that Jose would weaken and cry out for mercy, but they were wrong. As the sharp pain seared through his body, Jose thought of Christ on the cross and offered him everything, all the while shouting, "Long live Christ the King." Then the soldiers, all the meanwhile, these were grown men, sadistically torturing this young boy. The soldiers, hurling insults at him and giving him blows, forced him to walk on his flayed feet through the cobblestone streets toward the cemetery, leaving behind him a river of blood. Along the way, some of the soldiers cut his body with a machete until he was bleeding from several wounds. With every blow, the young boy cried out, "Long live Christ the King." At times, they stopped him, shouted back at him, "If you shout death to Christ the King, if only you shout death to Christ the King, we will spare your life." Jose would only shout back, "I will never give in. Long live Christ the King. Long live Our Lady of Guadalupe." At the end of his Calvary, when they reached the cemetery, the soldiers stood before the boy, showed him the newly dug hole which would be his grave. They riddled his battered body with bayonet stabs. At each stab, "Long live Christ the King." The commander of the guard addressed the young boy, cruelly asking if he wanted to send a message to his father. The whole time, they were trying to get him to deny his faith. "Do you want to send a message to your father now?" To this, Jose replied without yielding, "We will see each other in heaven. Long live Christ the King. Long live Our Lady of Guadalupe." These were his last words. The captain drew his pistol, ended the young boy's life with a gunshot to the head. He was thrown into the pit at 11:30 on Friday, February 10th, 1928, 14 years old, martyr of Christ the King. What does this have to do with anything that's going on today? Last year, one American cardinal, shortly before retiring, left us the following reflection, commenting on what's going on today in society, seeing how over many issues, amongst them, just the most controversial ones, issues of marriage, issues of natural law, issues of public promotion of sodomy, issues of abortion, contraception being forced upon all citizens of the country with the healthcare mandate, and how Catholic after Catholic, how Catholic institution after Catholic institution is yielding and shouting out, even publicly without hiding it, shouting death to Christ the King. Commenting on these words, this cardinal said, "Throughout history, when Catholics have been forced to choose between being taught by God or instructed by politicians, by professors, by editors of major newspapers, by entertainers, whoever it might be, and this is not new, it's happened in history, when forced with this option, many have opted to go along with the powers that be. This reduces a great tension in their lives, although it also brings with it the worship of a false god. Many, in the countless persecutions of the church which have happened, which continue to happen, which will come, many to reduce this tension between Christ the King and the prince of this world, Satan, many to reduce this tension have opted to go along with the powers that be, falling into a worship of a false god. Today we're tempted to do the same thing, precisely the same thing. Even if we're not forced to use the same words, by our actions, we're tempted to shout, "Crucify him, death to Christ the King." I want to relieve this tension. We're tempted to say, "Lord, I'll follow you, sure. I'll sing you hosannas, proclaim you Christ the King, but I will not follow you to Calvary." If today in my life you ask me to go to Calvary, I can't. I can't accept those teachings of yours, which would make me have to change my life, that would inconvenience me in any way, that would make me have to suffer for you. Lord, I'll stop at Calvary. There I will not follow you. We're tempted to say, Lord, I'll follow you. I'll sing your hosannas in my private life, at home, in church, but not before others, not under pressure, not when I have to choose between two masters, not when I have to defend you, when I have to be ridiculed because of you there. No, not when I have something to lose, whether it be my reputation, my comfort, my job, my life. There, I'll shout back, death to Christ the King. I might not use those words just so my conscience is in peace, but Lord, there, you're no longer my King. I don't want to have to suffer tension in my life because of you. The list goes on, and today as the tension builds over many, many issues that make us Catholics and make the world anti-Catholic, as the tension builds, many are tempted to do that. Many give us the example of precisely that. Catholic after Catholic, public figure after public figure, institution, Catholic institution after Catholic institution. Many choose to reduce this tension, to go along with the powers that be, to worship a false god, and to shout, death to Christ the King. The cardinal went on with his reflection, saying it takes no moral courage to conform to government and social pressure. It takes instead a deep faith to swim against the tide. As Pope Francis recently encouraged young people like Blessed Jose and all people at a recent World Youth Day. Catholics do know, the cardinal concluded, with the certainty of faith that when Christ returns in glory as King to judge the living and the dead, the Church, in some recognizable shape or form that is both Catholic and apostolic, will be there to meet him, will be there to reign with him, will be there to triumph with him. There is no such guarantee for any country, for any culture, for any society of this or any age. It took less than a week, took some pressure, took a bit of persecution 2,000 years ago to change the hosannas of the people into violent shouts of crucify him, away with him, death to him. When the hour of the Passion arrived, the scandal of our Lord's cross was too much for some. They either demanded our Lord's death or fled. No one, or almost no one, embraced our Lord's cross. The only persons to remain faithful were the ones that stayed close to Our Lady, who followed our Lord all the way to Calvary. And Our Lady did not spare them the cross, not a single bit of it. She led them all the way to Calvary, all the way to our Lord's crucifixion. Because our Lord reigns, but he reigns on this earth principally from the cross. And all those who want to reign with him in this life and in the next, all those of us who want to reign with Christ in this life and in the next, have to embrace our cross, let ourselves be crucified with him, stay close to Our Lady, so as not to wimp out under the pain and the weight of the cross. Praised be Jesus and Mary.